My religion is very simple. My religion is kindness, said the Dalai Lama. Many religions, including Unitarian Universalism, lift up the virtue of kindness. It is a unifying principle, a point of connection, but how often do we really reflect on what it means and on what it requires of us? Unfortunately, not all religious people are kind, so perhaps it's actually more challenging than it seems on the surface. The Dalai Lama's religious practice involves a good deal of discipline, and out of this discipline comes the impulse to be kind. In the Bible, the Greek word for kindness is defined in part as the ability to act for the welfare of others who test our patience. In the Christian stories, humans tax God's patience over and over again, and yet God is kind. And in turn, God expects human beings to exhibit a similar kindness toward other human beings. Another way of understanding this biblical notion of kindness is the ability to adapt to others in their needs, rather than requiring them to adapt to our needs and desires. We have all known kindness in our lives, in small and large ways. We know how touching it is to receive the kindness of others. The experience remains with us. This was abundantly clear when I asked on social media this week, the source of many great stories, what is the most generous kindness you have ever experienced? The stories that I received were full of struggle, generosity, and gratitude, reflecting both the challenges and the rewards of this virtue. They were accounts of life-changing experiences. So I want to share a few of those stories with you this morning. My friend from seminary shared about when her stepdaughter, the child of her ex-partner, died in a car accident. She brought her friend Martin to the funeral, which was held at the mosque that her stepdaughter had been a part of. Martin had never set foot in a mosque before, but when they arrived, he went to the edge of the men's section and she went to the edge of the women's. Even though the two sections were separate, he reached out and held her hand so that she would know he was there. At the cemetery, only men were allowed to be at the graveside while the women were in a building on a hill overlooking it. Martin went and helped the men to bury this young woman that he didn't even know, and he did it for his friend. I will never forget, she wrote, how he put aside his own discomfort to bear witness for me. Martin's accompaniment was an act of profoundly generous kindness. A member of this church shared how 6 days after her mother died, she presided over a big meeting of PTA and school district leaders, and everyone, including the superintendent, was wearing blue, her mother's favorite color. Another person shared about unexpectedly finding herself with a baby in the first year of seminary, and as a UU at a Methodist school and a queer woman married to another woman, she was still acclimating to it all. One day after class, she walked out into the hallway and was greeted by a crowd of her classmates who had thrown her a baby shower and showered her with piles of gifts that she needed and hadn't had a chance to buy. She said that their goodwill and sincere kindness changed her forever. The injuries that she had felt from the Christianity of her upbringing were healed a little more that day. She said she felt like she had experienced true Christianity. A member of this church struggled for months to get her son out of the house in his wheelchair and into the school bus each morning. A stranger in the neighborhood knocked on her door and offered a wheelchair ramp that they no longer needed. It has made her life easier every morning since. It turns out that this kind neighbor was another member of this church who saw a need and reached out to help. Many of the stories were like this, people who saw a need and responded by cleaning your kitchen, doing your laundry, greeting you at the airport after a long trip with a bag of groceries, putting out a heater for your early morning workout, packing your children's clothes so you could prepare to travel out of town for a funeral while you wandered around the house lost in grief. You shared stories about people who took you into their homes and cared for you, whether through adoption, offering a safe and comfortable place to live after a divorce or a house fire, and even a stranger who hosted one of you for weeks while you were far from home, visiting your brother in the hospital, and then again when you returned for his memorial service. You shared stories about people who gave you a gift or did something for you out of the kindness of their hearts and asked nothing in return. Many of these occurred while traveling in foreign places where you found yourself in a dire situation and people spent the time to sit with you and to translate or to bring you to a safe place. A member of this church shared about being in a strange town when their car battery died. And after trying to fix it themselves, and after several failed phone calls to both auto shops and the police, one auto mechanic finally heard the panic in her voice and came and replaced the battery for free. The stories like this just kept coming, and they bolstered and reinforced my faith in humanity. One of the themes I noticed was kindness emerging from the experience of loss. In Naomi Shihab Nye's poem, which I read, Kindness, she writes, "Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. All this must go, so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness." Times of loss are opportunities for us to step in generous and kind ways, as we heard over and over in those stories. In listening to these stories, did you ever think, I'm not sure I could do that? If so, you're not alone. I read these stories with amazement, and I thought, how often do I really do something like this for another person? Not as often as I'd like to. None of the kindnesses that were offered were easy. It takes intention and practice to cultivate such generous kindness. Yet somehow there is this common myth that kindness is bland, weak, or easy. Not so. Kindness is not weak or easy. It requires us to be vulnerable and courageous. Adam Phillips, a psychoanalyst, and Barbara Taylor, a historian, co-wrote a book entitled On Kindness, in which they suggest that the rise of cynicism in our society is our flawed self-defense mechanism against the perceived perils of kindness. The emotional vulnerability that kindness requires is viewed as a liability, for if we crack that armor around our hearts, we might be exploited for being too kind. And this, they say, is too high a cost to pay for the warm inward balm of the benevolence for which we long in the deepest parts of ourselves. Kindness is the ability to bear the vulnerability of others and of oneself. The author suggests that we all long to be more kind, but breaking through our self-protective armor is not always easy. Kindness is not weak or easy. It requires us to shift from the idea of ourselves as wholly independent beings to a lived acknowledgement of our interdependence. Our own Unitarian forebears held in high esteem the ideals of independence and self-reliance as markers of spiritual success, as does much of our society today. These ideals do not necessarily or naturally move us to value kindness and mutual belonging and community. Can we really be successful and spiritually fulfilled if we attend only to our own needs and not those of others? Many of the stories I shared about generous acts of kindness demonstrated the necessity of acknowledging our interdependence. Our well-being depends on one another, and therefore, it benefits us to be kind. Kindness is not weak or easy. It requires sacrificing or giving up something for the sake of others. This leads me to another myth or common confusion about kindness, which is that it is synonymous with niceness or charity. In my view, there is a difference between the three. The story that we told earlier in the service, Harlequin and the Gift of Many Colors, about a boy who was able to participate in the carnival wearing this amazing costume thanks to the kindness of his friends, is, I think, a good example for distinguishing between niceness, charity, and kindness. If Harlequin's friends had been nice, they might have said, "Oh, I'm so sorry you can't come to carnival. We'll miss you." Charity would have been giving him a costume. But they did neither of those things. They literally gave up pieces of their own clothes and costumes so that Harlequin's mother could patch them together into a new costume for her son. Together, his friends showed kindness because they wanted to be with him, and they wouldn't let a costume get in the way. Niceness does not ask anything of us except words. And charity may ask something of us, but it's not always difficult to give. Kindness is different. To be kind requires us to give of ourselves, to sacrifice something that we have for the benefit of another individual or for the greater good. Harlequin's friends saw a need and responded with an act which at one level was a practical solution, but on a deeper level was a generous expression of kindness and love and friendship. They were unsure of their impact at first when they presented him with this pile of fabric scraps. But sometimes those who do acts of kindness don't immediately realize how significant their act is. For example, I doubt that the people who gave their seminary classmate a baby shower knew that their gesture helped to heal her relationship with Christianity. The seminarian's kindness and the kindness of Harlequin's friends allowed the recipients to fully join them in community. Harlequin danced into the town square, took part in the festival, clothed in the kindness and love of his friends. Kindness is not weak or easy. Have you ever felt stuck between the impulses described by Phillips and Taylor, between self-protection and vulnerability, between self-interest and the greater good? I know I have at times. But my Unitarian Universalist faith and church challenge me to stretch myself and help me practice the religious discipline of kindness. Even the Dalai Lama needs to practice. Phillips and Taylor describe kindness not only as an act of being vulnerable yourself, but also as bearing other people's vulnerability. This is what we do at church. When we listen to one another's stories, when we pray for one another, when we offer gifts and acts of service. I hope that this church helps you to stretch and exercise your kindness muscles, because it has great rewards for our personal, relational, and religious lives. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe that each person has inherent worth and dignity. Showing kindness is one way we acknowledge the goodness and worthiness in another's humanity and employ our own goodness to connect with them. It brings us closer to other people. Kindness shared from one person to another also makes space for divine grace to enter. It cracks open our hearts or the armor we use to protect them, opening us to the mysterious force of love at work in us and in the universe. One of the phrases we are using in this theme year on the generous life is give, change lives, repeat. This is a good phrase to remember when it comes to kindness. Shakespeare's Juliet said, "My bounty is as boundless as the sea, my love as deep. The more I give to thee, the more I have, for both are infinite." What she says of love could also be said of kindness. There's a great deal of evidence that the more someone receives or witnesses kindness, the more they will be kind themselves. The more we give, the more it changes our lives, because we mingle our humanity with that of others. We discover things about ourselves, desires and challenges through our vulnerability. For this reason, if you are still pondering what your Lenten practice will be, might I suggest kindness? In this church, we talk about Lent as a season to challenge ourselves by both giving up something and taking on a practice. And after all, giving up something is what kindness requires of us. Perhaps you will give up a little bit of a sense of independence so that you can practice interdependence. Give up something tangible or concrete so that others will benefit. Or give up pieces of your costume so that your friend has one too, and you can enjoy their company. It will help you realize the limitations of your humanity, as we so often face in this season of Lent, but it will also open you to the beauty of life. If we really stop and examine our lives, we will realize that each of us is clothed in the gifts and sacrifices of other people and communities of which we are a part. Their thoughtfulness, love, generosity, and kindness. May you wear that coat of kindness with joy, gratitude, and humility. And may it inspire you to clothe others in kindness with all that you do. Not because it's the nice thing to do, or the easy thing to do, or even because it's the right thing to do, but because it will change you and change the recipient. The writer Henry James said, 3 things in human life are important. The first is to be kind. The second is to be kind. And the third is to be kind. May it be so for all of us. Amen.